Thank you so much. Joyful noise. Well, Halloween is now behind us. That was this past week, and of course some of you were so grateful for the rain because you got to keep all that candy. But anyway, one of the things around Halloween you've grown accustomed to seeing is that in various places there are advertisements for haunted houses. And I'll be honest with you, I've never gotten haunted houses. Don't like them, can't stand them, loathe haunted houses. Among other things, I hate that whole feeling of being scared. And I couldn't imagine saying, I hate how this feels, but let me pay you money so I can feel that. Anyway, but some people, they really like and enjoy and seek out these haunted houses. There was one this past week that was in the news that I'm not sure if you heard about it. It was in Summertown, Tennessee, and it is called McCamey Manor. McCamey Manor is a haunted house that has garnered not only just regional, but even now national attention because as of Thursday, 63,000 people had petitioned both the governor and the state senate to shut it down. They were saying that it was effectively operating as a torture chamber under disguise. This haunted house that bills itself as, quote, the nation's one and only extreme haunted attraction and survivor horror challenge. It is an unusual experience, to be sure, just to be able to even attempt to have the experience. It's not like a normal haunted house where you just show up at any given point during operating hours and pay your money and be able to experience it. In this case, first of all, there's no entry fee in terms of actual cost. You do, however, have to bring a bag of dog food for the owner's pets. Once that is done, to enter, you have to be over the age of 21. You're required to pass a physical exam. You have to bring a doctor's note that says that you are physically and mentally prepared to be able to experience something of this sort. You have to pass a background check, and you have to have either in-person live interview or a Facebook live interview with the management before you can even begin to experience this haunted manor. As if that were not enough, you have to also complete a 40-page waiver. The waiver includes, among other things, that you will not hold them liable, among other things, for personal injury, for being shaved, or losing a tooth. Participants must also create a safe word and watch a 2-hour warning video before the tour, which supposedly takes in excess of 10 hours to complete. I say supposedly because as of this point, no one has ever successfully completed it. You can either go through it in what is known as desolation mode, which is by yourself, or you can go through it with one other person. The owner has pledged that if someone successfully completes it, they will receive $20,000. Fox 17 in Nashville, Tennessee reported last year on the haunted house that there was a woman who was reported as being kidnapped. Police were dispatched. They arrived and found a woman shivering, beaten, and duct taped in a cellar. No charges were filed because she signed up for this experience. So you say, oh my goodness, this is craziness. Sure, there's craziness. But as of, again, Thursday, 27,000 people were on the waiting list to be able to experience it. 27,000 people. That's more than you can put in the Greensboro Coliseum by, 7,000 people. And you say, and I wonder, after reading and hearing these news reports, what's the matter with these people? Why in the world, what would lead someone to actively pursue having an experience like this? Where I may get shaved, where I may lose a tooth, where I may get beaten. I mean, then they say, we're going to touch you. Why in the world would you want to experience that? And best I can tell, from my perspective, I would answer that with a couple of suppositions. One is, there are some people that are just looking for a crazy, unusual experience. You got some people that are just absolute thrill seekers, and some would say, you know what, I just want to do that because there's nothing like that anywhere else in the country, maybe even nowhere else in the world, unless you're like in North Korea. So outside of North Korea, maybe there's nothing quite like this type of experience. I believe there are others that have signed up and are actively on the waiting list to experience McCamey Manor because they thought this: no one else has been able to do this, but I could. I've got this. I can do this. That type of self-confidence, that type of belief in personal ability is something that American culture regularly lauds and applauds. We celebrate rugged individualism. We celebrate pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. And this sense of self-accomplishment and self-ability, that sounds great in terms of American cultures and ideology, but it's really difficult, and it poses an enormous challenge for people that then also profess to be followers of Christ. Because in your relationship with God, hear me in this, self-confidence is a recipe for disaster. If you believe that the God in heaven who has made it possible for you to have a relationship with Him, if you believe the truth, which is that He wants to use you and that He wants to afford you with opportunities through which He can use you to impact for time and eternity the lives of others, if you believe those things to be true, one surefire way to ensure that will not happen, for those opportunities to effectively be squandered, for you to miss the boat of God's being able to use you, well, then you effectively have this posture before the Lord. Hey, I've got this. I've got this. You say, I don't know about that. Are you sure? Well, candidly, I'm really sure about that, and I believe the Bible makes it clear. And you'll see it as we continue walking through the life of Samson. Join me today in Judges chapter 16. Judges chapter 16. We're actually today looking at the same passage we looked at last week. You say, well, Michael, what's the deal with that? Well, sincerely, there was some meat left on these bones that are that's really important, I think, that could very easily be missed and glossed over. We get the stage in our mind. Samson's a miracle child. God sent angels to his parents who were barren, said, you're going to have this son. That the totality of his days are going to be dedicated, consecrated to the service of God. God's going to use him in significant ways. That's the plan. This dedication, this being set apart, is even going to be physically demonstrated because he's going to take a Nazirite vow, which means, among other things, that throughout the totality of his life, he won't touch unclean things, he'll have no consumption of alcohol, and his hair is not to be cut. So even if you knew nothing else about Samson, you would say, hey, this is a guy, I don't even know his name, but this is a guy that's set apart for the service and use of God. Even though he has had angels herald his birth, even though there are all these amazing opportunities for which God wanted to use him, Samson has been acting very casually. He's been operating very cavalier as it relates to the plans and purposes that God had for his life. And he's made a whole series of just boondoggled decisions. He has made a whole series of careless, foolish decisions, not just as a person, but specifically someone who has a relationship with God, who is set apart for God's use and service. Among other things, now he has for the second time joined himself to a woman that is not in relationship with God. Not only is she outside the nation of Israel, but she's more than just a Philistine. She's someone, and these are women that do not have a relationship with the Lord, and they're drawing Samson even further away. When last we left this passage, when we were spending some time last week in chapter 16, we're introduced to somebody whose name is almost synonymous with Samson. When you hear Samson in your mind, you almost instinctively add the words, and Delilah. So this woman that is not a God-fearer, this woman that does not have any personal connection with God, she has really captured Samson's heart. But she's a Philistine, and the Philistines don't like Samson because he has had several instances where he is demonstrating truly supernatural strength. Literally, over 1,000 Philistines have been killed by Samson alone. We've read already about those instances. And the Philistines are concerned about Samson. They view him as a threat, and so they go to Delilah once she is in a relationship with Samson, and they say, listen, we'll give you some real money, a ton of money, all of us. We'll chip in if you can find out what's the source of his strength. If you can let us in on that, then we'll let you in on some significant personal riches. We saw it last week, and you see this beginning to unfold in chapter 16. She says in verse 6, Samson, please tell me, where does your great strength come from? How could someone tie you up and make you helpless? Just hypothetically, supposing we wanted to overcome you, what would it take? And so he tells her something that is not the truth. That if you were to take these sinews, these tendons that are uncured, undried from an animal, if you were to bind me with those, that would be enough to constrain me. Of course, he should have no contact with this as a Nazirite, but of course, you remember, it doesn't work. She ties him up, Philistines come in, he breaks free as if this is nothing. And she's like, quit pulling my leg, you're messing with me. And so he says, at this point, if you tie me up with new ropes, brand new ropes, tough, strong ropes that aren't weakened by years and decades worth of use, new ropes, that's what it'll do. That's what it'll take. And of course, it wasn't that either. Then finally, she's like, Samson, come on, just shoot straight with me. You can trust me. I mean, we're in this relationship with each other. Trust me. Trust me. And so he says, if you take the braids of my hair and you weave them in with the fabric of a loom, I'll be confined. I'll be constrained by that, and there's no way I'd be able to get out. And once again, same thing happens. She does what he says. It's not the truth. And so he breaks free. By the time you get to verse 16, we're told that she nagged Samson day after day, pleaded with him until she wore him out. And finally, Samson told her the whole truth. Verse 17, my hair has never been cut because I'm a Nazirite to God from birth. If I am shaved, my strength will leave me and I will become weak like any other man. Not surprisingly, when Delilah realized that he had told her the truth, she sent this message to the Philistine leaders. Come one more time, for he has told me the whole truth. The Philistine leaders came to her and brought the silver with them. Then she let Samson fall asleep on her lap. She calls a man to shave off the 7 braids on his head. In this way she made him helpless. His strength left him. Then she cried, Samson, the Philistines are here. When he awoke from his sleep, he said, I will escape as I did before. I will shake myself free. He's saying, I've got this. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. The next thing that's going to happen is that the Philistines seize him, they gouge out his eyes, and he is forced to grind grain in prison. If I wanted to get your attention, what's one of the ways I would do it? If I wanted to get your attention, what's one of the ways I would do it? If I wanted to get your attention, what's one of the ways I would do it? I just did it. I repeated myself. You should pay attention to that if you have a Bible and you ever look at it, which I hope you do. When things are repeated, I mean, God doesn't have to say anything more than once for it to be true, but when things are said repeatedly, we ought to take note. Pay attention to what you see in chapter 16. Verse 7, Samson says, if they tie me up with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, what? I will become weak and be like any other man. First time. Verse 11. He told her, if they tie me up with new ropes and they've never been used, I will become weak and be like any other man. Skip down to verse 17. If I am shaved, my strength will leave me and I will become weak and be like any other man. Not once, not twice, but 3 times Samson is expressing something. And the fact that he does so and says the exact same thing over and over and over again suggests this is really something that is on the forefront of Samson's mind. This is a statement that we as the reader ought to pay attention to. And it conveys this idea that it is on Samson's mind, I have unusual abilities. My abilities are what set me apart. I am different. I am unique. I'm not like everybody else because of what I can do. He is seemingly ever aware of that thought. But something I want you to pay attention to is not simply what Samson does say, but what Samson effectively never says. We've been at this for a number of weeks, and if you go back to chapter 14, that's where you see Samson as an adult enter the stage. This is the first time we see words coming out of Samson's mouth. If you go from the beginning of chapter 14 through verse 20 of chapter 16, the name of God by Samson is mentioned only once, and in that way, only in a peripheral manner. Notice how he says it in verse 17. My hair has never been cut because I'm a Nazirite to God from birth. God and Nazirite are on the same footing. Samson is deeply concerned about being and winding up like anybody and everybody else. He believes that he's different. He's confident that he's different, and his difference is inextricably linked to his ability, to what he has, to what sets him apart. But something that is pervasively absent in Samson's words and apparently in Samson's thought is the source of his strength. God is completely removed from the equation of Samson's life, which can be easily demonstrated over and over and over again. Samson is absolutely cavalier about his walk with God. He's completely cavalier about standards that have been erected. He's completely cavalier about guarding and, in fact, not guarding his relationships. Even the closest relationships on earth, he's completely cavalier, leaving the door completely open for any possible threat to his relationship with God. And it seems also that Samson believes something that over the years many have also come to believe with regard to Samson. Something that I believe, and in fact I believe the text communicates, is false. Samson was not strong because of his hair. It was not enormously long hair in these lengthy braids that made Samson strong. It was not the cutting of the hair that resulted in weakness. From whence did the weakness come? The passage tells us, the end of verse 20, the Lord had left him. Samson became weak, became like anybody else because it had nothing to do with a haircut, but because the Lord had left him. Samson is concerned about strength, isn't he? Yeah, he's really concerned about strength. Again, we saw it in verse 7, you see it in verse 11, you see it in verse 17. He expresses this awareness and seemingly this concern of becoming like any and everybody else, becoming weak like any and every other man. And so what does he want to do? Samson wants to pursue strength and safeguard strength and avoid weakness at all cost. In the process, what he experienced is what you read at the end of verse 20, that the Lord left him. The power of God, the touch of God on Samson's life, the hand of God on Samson's life is taken back, is removed. That power is withheld. And what can Samson do of consequence? Nothing. Nothing. You know, there's a whole series of ironies in this story, isn't there? This guy who wanted to pursue and safeguard strength at all cost, wants to avoid weakness by any means necessary, and what does he experience? The guy that focused on strength experienced weakness. This guy that had been operating with a sense of invincibility for years has effectively told himself, whatever the challenge is, listen, I've got this. Doesn't. This guy who has prided and secured himself in his ability is brought down by disability. Does that type of thing happen today? Sure it does. But I'm not talking about individuals or collectively churches with long hair. But this type of thing, where you have individuals that have time, resources, and opportunity, that have plans, intentions, and aspirations, and yet nothing comes of it. How many times in the life of this or any other church is it that you've got a good plan? We're going to do X. We're going to undertake X. We're going to do this. We've got volunteers Financially, we've got it resourced. We've got it paid for. We've got all the stuff that we need. We've got everything. We've got all of our bases covered. And then whatever it is we undertake, this event, this focus, this priority, this task, this mission endeavor, whatever it is, but we will pursue it. We got people, plans, resources. We've got everything that we need. And then as it unfolds, as it actually occurs, in the end, you stand back and say, well, why did nothing come of that? Why was there no impact? Why was this just like trying to scoop a box of air? Why do we have nothing to show for this? Why is it? Because we all too often do exactly what Samson did, which is to pursue strength and to avoid weakness at all cost, effectively saying by our posture, hey God, I've got this. Whatever the opportunity, whatever the task, whatever the possibility, we don't look towards God and say, hey, I need you. We look in the mirror and say, hey, you've got this. Every day that's what Samson did. Over and over again, he presents a challenge and he tells Delilah it's X, Y, or Z. And every time, oh, I've got this, I can take care of this. Then finally, his strength is gone. His eyes are gone. His opportunity is gone. His freedom is gone because the Lord had left him. What we're dealing with here in the scheme of things is not an Old Testament concept. This is just a biblical concept. In fact, you see it described by Paul over in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. You don't have to turn there, but listen to what he says. Notice the contrast between what we've just read in Judges compared to what Paul says in 2 Corinthians 12. Remember, Samson has just 3 times expressed, I am so concerned about losing my ability. I don't want to be weak like anybody, just everybody else. Paul says, therefore, I will most gladly boast all the more about my weaknesses. Samson and Paul are pursuing something, but they're pursuing something opposite. These are trains going in opposite directions. Paul says, I will gladly boast all the more about my weakness. I want to take pride in something. And the thing I'm going to take pride in is the fact that I don't bring anything to the table. That my abilities are minuscule. That my abilities are effectively non-existent. I've got squat. Paul's saying, I'm going to pat myself on the back, not because of what I can do, but I'm going to celebrate the fact. I'm not going to hide the fact. I'm not going to shirk and avoid the reality of my weakness. I'm going to celebrate my weakness so that Christ's power may reside in me. I take pleasure in weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and difficulties for the sake of Christ, because Paul says this, when I am weak, then I'm strong. Why is that? Because of what verse 9, where Paul is told by the Lord that God's strength is perfected, not in strength, not in ability, but in weakness. In the end, why does Samson effectively come to nothing? Why is this guy that has such amazing opportunity that angels literally show up and say to his mom and dad, God is going to bless you with a miracle child? How do we wind up just 2 chapters later with this guy pushing a millstone around at the behest of the Philistines in a Philistine prison with his eyes gouged out? How in the world does that happen? Because Samson pursued strength. He wanted to safeguard his ability. He felt, I am different. I am set apart because of what I can do. And when God got removed from the equation of his ability, he saw what he could do. Nothing. And those enormous opportunities, these amazing ways that God could have done something profoundly significant, so many times get squandered. Why? Because he was interested in pursuing and safeguarding his strength. But God was looking for something entirely different. He wasn't looking for Samson's strength. He was looking for his weakness. He wasn't looking for somebody then, and He's not looking for somebody today to say, look at what I can do. He's looking for somebody to look toward Him and say, I can't do this without you. I can't do anything without you. Samson was so concerned about being ordinary, completely overlooking the fact that that is exactly what God is still looking for. Plain, old, ordinary. Because God can use ordinary. I can't stand it when we lose electricity because it's so aggravating. I remember it was just a year ago, Hurricane Michael came through. It was late, and it was, in fact, I remember it came in the eve of Andrew's birthday. His birthday is October the 12th, and so I remember on October the 12th, we had no power because late in the afternoon it hit with this massive wind, and trees were down all across Greensboro. There was massive power outages, and I remember that night we were all in the den. And in theory, isn't that kind of nice? We're not going to have any TV, no distractions. We'll just all be together. Me, a pregnant wife, 5 kids, dark room. It's kind of sounding like McCamey Manor, isn't it? Oh, it was miserable. It was absolutely miserable. We wound up bringing sleeping bags in there. It was a terrible night. And it was so aggravating, and this has happened time and time again. I'm sure it's happened to you as well. Let's say you need to go to the bathroom, so you're going to have to take a flashlight because the house is pitch black. And so you go into the bathroom, and as you walk into the bathroom, what do? You flip the light on, only to be reminded again, got no power. Got no power. You know, we don't realize the importance of power, unfortunately, until we don't have it. Samson has overlooked over and over and over again where his power came from. And when the power gets disconnected, he says effectively to himself again, I've got this. Flips on the switch. And there's nothing. Absolutely nothing. Can we just be honest in evaluating our lives, both individually and collectively, and say that too often we're not seeing any signs of real power, at least real power in terms of God using us in meaningful, impactful ways? Why do you think that is? I'll tell you how I think the answer, or where the answer probably resides. That because on too many days, for so many on virtually every day, we walk into that day's events, that day's of challenges, like 26,000 people are waiting to experience a haunted house in Tennessee, and they say, I've got this. We wake up today and we say, I've got this. We wake up tomorrow, I've got this. I've got this. We tell ourselves that we have to guard against any loss, that we have to protect against the loss of strength, that we cannot reveal or demonstrate any vulnerability, when God is all the while looking consistently for weakness. For people to say, I can't do this, and I'm not interested in doing this without you. What does it look like? How can you identify this? Let me just give you a really quick question, a really quick litmus test to be able to ask and think through this and say, am I in that boat? Am I in the Samson ship? This past week, just think back in the rearview mirror, just this past week, past 7 days. How many times did God, in one way or another, hear from you, I got to have your help in this? Was there a single time this week that God heard you say, I can't do this? Was there a single time that God heard you say, I have no idea which way to go, but I'm leaning on you because you know what I don't. I don't have this together. I need you. Just in the past week, was there any time that God heard any of those things from you? If He didn't hear that from you, your silence said this to God: I got this. Going to school as a student and withstanding the challenges, whether from peers or from godless worldviews, I got this. Going to work and successfully navigating interpersonal relationships and at all pointing people in Christ's directions, I got this. Leading your Bible study group in Sunday school teachers. How many from you did God hear as you're preparing? God, I need you to guide me in this. I could absolutely mess this up. I need you to illuminate your truth and lead me in what it is that I should share with these kids, with these students, with these adults. If God never heard that, do you know what He heard you say by your silence? I've got this. And when God hears that, do you know what He'll do? Have it. It's all yours. It's on you. And He steps back. And then we realize what in the end we have to bring to the table, which is nothing of consequence. Let me ask you this. Why is it that way? To me, I think one of the best ways to answer that question is to think about what it was like, in particular for you guys, as you proposed to your wife. I don't know where along the way engagement rings became kind of the must-have part of proposal, but if you don't have a ring, you don't propose, by and large. And it seems like most of the time when you propose with a ring, most of the time it's in a jewelry box, isn't it? So it's white gold, platinum, yellow gold, whatever it is, where there's a diamond. But what is that ring typically in? It's typically not in a beautiful box. It's in a plain, very plain, not at all decorated, not at all fancy, but completely black box. Why? Because that directs your focus to what really matters. Not on the box, but what's inside. Why in the world is it that God is looking for weakness from me? Why is it that He wants me to effectively be a black box? It's because of this. He's not interested in showcasing you. He's not interested in pointing people to you. He's not interested in pointing people to your ability. You know why? You don't have any. He's not interested in pointing people to you because you can't save them. He's not interested in pointing people to you because you can't forgive them. He's not interested in pointing people to you because you don't hold the keys to death, hell, and the grave. And so, as long as we are saying to Him, I've got this, do you know what we'll keep having? Nothing. Nothing of significance. I'll leave you with one question. Are we weak enough to use? Will you bow your heads with me? Paul says that God has chosen to put the gospel, to put the truth in plain old earthen vessels, so the excellence of the power may be of Him and not of us. It's not because God's got some gigantic ego. It's just because it's the truth, that He's greater than anyone and anything. And if you're greater than anyone and anything, why would you want to celebrate that which is not? Why would you want to draw attention and point people to that which is not? That's why God's interested in pointing people to Him, because He can do what we can't. And there's a part of us that seems to know that, but then this past week How many times did God hear you in any form say, I've got to have you. I need you. I'm depending on you. I'm leaning on you. Because as the old hymn says, without him, I would be nothing. Samson discovered that up close and personal. Without him, I am nothing. Without him, I've got nothing. Listen, don't let it get to the point where you have to fall on your face in utter humiliation. Don't wait until everything that matters is stripped from you to discover that God's strength is made perfect in weakness, and He's looking for you to be somebody that says today, tomorrow, this week, this month, this year, going forward, I want my days to begin, among other things, with the thought and the intentional expression, God, I've got to have your help. Is that where you are this morning? What's God saying to you in your heart right now? I can't pretend to tell you exactly what it is, but if there is some unease, if there's a part of you that feels like, man, as that was said, it kind of hurt to the touch, I just want to tell you that's not me. That's not some brilliance I bring to the equation. That's the Holy Spirit of God saying this needs to change. He's not looking for you to pull your shirt back with a gigantic S on your chest. He's looking for you to have a posture where you're on your knees and you say, God, I'm not interested in doing this without you because apart from you I can do nothing. Do you need to say that to Him today? Maybe you need to at this altar. Maybe it's kneeling where you are. Maybe it's right in your pew. I'm telling you, God's looking today to find weakness in you. He wants you to be weak enough to use. Will He find it in you? Maybe somebody else is here today to say, you know, I've heard in general about this idea of having a relationship with Christ, and I know that I don't have it. I'd like to experience it. I just don't know how to get there. In just a moment, we're going to have a time of decision. And maybe this thought is frightening to you, but I would invite you to just step out and come and share that with me. Let me begin a conversation to be able to point you to a Savior that can do what I can't. If you're petrified of that thought, will you see me? Will you see Jamie afterwards? We would love to be able to talk to you and share with you a difference that will change not only time, but for you will change all of eternity. Maybe you'd say, you know what, this is a place that God's leading me to formally connect with. It's not because they're so strong, but this is a place that's weak enough for God to use. And I think He wants to use even my weakness as a vehicle to impact people in this community. And I want to be part of this church family. However it is that He's speaking to you today, He wants you to respond, and my hope is that you will. Father, it's so counterintuitive so many times what we are looking for, that we are looking for the exact opposite of what you are. What you value, we seem to devalue. You value weakness because when that's present, then you can work. That's when your strength can be demonstrated. For us, we want to guard and safeguard strength because we think that's where strength can be found, but that's where inability, that's where disability, that's ultimately where weakness is found. So Lord, I pray that you do a work in us that leads us to make choices today that cause us to leave this place weak enough to be used. That's our prayer, and we commit this time of decision to you in Christ's name. Amen.